This is one of the 2 days I dread during the year, and I think what I'll say is mostly an avoidance of thinking about Prabhupada in his last days, even though such an extraordinary, transcendental person, to imagine him in a difficult situation, painful situation is almost impossible if one has a choice. So my offering is to avoid that. My speaking to you all. A second problem is that after being confronted by all the sincerity of the speakers, of course, it's very embarrassing for a person like me. I see, and there's a song, Jadi Govardhan Hoite by Murari Gupta, and he says, just become simple. And I see the simplicity and the purity of the devotees is very, very confronting, because I am absent of that quality. But I'll explain a little bit of what it's like being me from different points of view. Because a lot of devotees see black, it's like this or it's like this, but I see mostly gray always. And when I do read Prabhupada's books, and that will be the final point that I'd like to make in this talk. And I read them, I could say constantly, and I listen to Prabhupada constantly, and still I see gray a lot, and how complicated life is. And I'd like to give you some examples. And how complicated spiritual life is, in a sense. Even though, and I know devotees, I've even seen one devotee, his WhatsApp thing is, it's simple for the simple. So here I stand, complicated for the complicated. So when Gunanava Prabhu was speaking a few days ago about the early days in Vrindavan, he told one story that really struck me. He told many stories that really struck me, but he told how if you wanted a lassi in the very early days, the lassi wala, he wouldn't hand it to you because you were an untouchable, a white person, an untouchable. Rather, he'd put it on something and sort of push it towards you, and then you would have to take it from there. Now there's the austerity of dealing with people who inherently think that you're terrible, but that's not the point that I want to make right now. It's more that the culture has changed so much, and this ancient Varnashrama culture has changed so much even since 50 years ago. Another not pastime, but a story that one devotee born in a Brahmin family told me. He told me this. It's a little crude, so forgive me. He approached his grandfather, he was a Sharma, and he approached his grandfather wearing shorts, and his grandfather said to him that you go away. Next thing you'll be standing up while passing urine, which. The culture was so exacting. He would face this way when he would take a bath in this season, and this way when he'd bathe in this season, and this way in this season. Another Brahmin-born devotee told me that in his village, if he was playing with a person of a lower caste, his family would make him bathe before coming into the house. This is a culture that has changed so much, because change is inevitable. It has to happen. Time forces change. Some examples that and here's where it becomes more interesting a little bit, because I'll tell some little pastimes with Prabhupada that I participated in. That one time, I used to, at different times of my life, I had different things that gave me pleasure. At one time in my life, I loved to give Prabhupada gold. That was like the pleasure of my life. And I gave him a gold ring. One time I gave him a little gold ring in 1972, pure soft gold, that had written on it Jai ISKCON. Because the GBC, he had just disbanded the GBC, and I wanted to encourage him. So I gave him that. There was simplicity at one time. And that, I think that ring, His Holiness Tamal Krishna Maharaj gave to Romeshwar after Prabhupada left. And then another ring I gave him had a P on it for Prabhupada, and he was wearing it. He wore it for a long, long time, and he ended up giving it to his son, Vrindavan Chandra Day, because his son came to him and he said, "I have no money for bangles," and Prabhupada gave that to him and said, "I'm not attached," like that. And then another, I gave him also a bracelet, an ID bracelet that said Prabhupada on it, and that Bhagawan used to wear sometimes after. And now I think it's in the manor in the safe. I'd like to see it again. And then, but one time when Prabhupada came to Hong Kong in 1972, I asked one Chinese businessman to get Prabhupada a present, a bracelet, a gold bracelet. And I expected something quite simple, but he gave Prabhupada this ornate lady's bracelet, and Prabhupada allowed him to put it on him like that. And then later, when I had the fortune of traveling, sitting next to Prabhupada on the plane, and because sannyasis in times they're completely renounced. They don't touch money, they don't touch fire, they don't touch, what to speak of, wear ladies' gold bracelets. So while I was sitting next to Prabhupada on the plane, he said to me, "Is this for a sannyasi or for a bridesmaid?" So I said, "It cost $250, Prabhupada," which was probably worth about $10,000 now. And he said, "Oh." And that was the end of it. Because Prabhupada was so practical, because his interest was to spread the Krishna consciousness movement, and he wanted unlimited wealth. There was a photograph that I actually saw in his old house in where he grew up on Mahatma Gandhi Road, and I heard Prabhupada speak about this, and I actually saw the photograph. It was a painting of Ramakrishna. Someone is offering him money, and he's going like this. And Prabhupada commented on that you can take a photograph of me, of someone offering money, and I'm going like more, give more. So I'm actually not telling these stories are cute, of course, but and we like to laugh at the cuteness and cleverness of Prabhupada, but at some point there will get to be a very, hopefully a deeper meaning to this all. Because Prabhupada, nothing was superficial, as so many devotees have mentioned. Everything was deep because it was coming from the deepest place. It was coming from his secret heart, which was Vrindavan, Radha and Krishna Vrindavan, and because he was always there, and because he always carried Vrindavan with him, everything he did, everything he said, had such meaning and depth to it, because everything was coming from that place. So the point that I would like to make is that that we can't really hold rigid to philosophy in one sense, or rather every point of the philosophy. Another example is when in Hong Kong I asked Prabhupada about could we play guitars during kirtan. We didn't ask him about alto saxophones at that time, but we asked him about guitars. I asked him that, and he said, my Guru Maharaj said that kirtan means kol kartal, meaning drum and kartals. And then I said, But the Chinese people, they can't relate to that so much. And I pushed a little bit, and he said, okay, then you could play guitars. And then another time in a similar way, I asked him about dressing in Hong Kong, because we would wear dhotis and kurtas and saris. I wouldn't wear the sari, but Mataji Zaktrini would. And so I asked him, could we wear non-devotee clothes, because the nature of Hong Kong is so materialistic and this and that. And he said, yes, you can do that, but you should wear tilak, even if it's very thin, but you should wear tilak. I'm not sure if he was just doing that, saying that so that we wouldn't forget who we were, or the preaching would go better. Probably a combination of both. So things change, and Prabhupada's way of preaching shifted and changed in many ways. And how do you make the decisions on what to change and what you shouldn't change? What's changeable, ultimately, what's foundational? If you change the foundation of a building, the building will collapse. So how do you make the decisions between what's changeable, adjustable, and what's not adjustable? Because time, as I have seen in 1,000 ways, even if we say we're not going to change anything, time forces change. It forces change. It forces it to change. So how do you make this? How do you discriminate between the changeable and the unchangeable? So once I was sitting with Shrutakirti Prabhu in the room in Melbourne, 1975, when Srila Prabhupada was taking a massage, and it was just the three of us sitting, and Prabhupada was sort of reminiscing, and he said, because I allowed women to live in the temples, therefore I was successful. He said, because of this, this is what he actually said, because of this I was successful. And then he said, my godbrothers criticized me for this. But then he sort of said, and they don't have anyone coming except during the Navadvip parikramas, and then it's only women who come anyway, basically. And then Shrutakirti Prabhu asked a very, very piercing and intelligent question. He said, how do you know the difference between making an adjustment, because Prabhupada had said because I made this adjustment, because of that I was successful. So he said, how do you know the difference? He asked Prabhupada, how do you know the difference between making an adjustment and changing the philosophy, basically, the foundational principles? And Prabhupada, he thought for a while, and how is he going to explain this, the depth of his some of his depth to us children, and inexperienced children, at least in my case. And he said, very simply, that takes a little intelligence. But he didn't say you can't change anything, nor did he say you can change everything, but he said that takes a little intelligence. It takes intelligence to know what is adjustable and differentiating that from the non-adjustable. So, I don't have an answer to that other than having intelligence and consulting. There is a citation from the Parasarya Samhita that says that if 6 brahmanas agree on a point, you can accept, because what to do when the acharya isn't present? And the churches all over the world have gone through this question: when the great acharya leaves, how do you make decisions? How do you know what the philosophy is on its subtle points? So in the Catholic Church, the creation of the office of the bishop was specifically for that, to make philosophical discriminations and decide on philosophical points. and all religions, and in Buddhism, after the Buddha left, the disciples gathered together and he said, well, what is our philosophy? And as Brahmatirtha Prabhu reminded me, the barber was the only one who was there on all occasions, so he helped formulate what the philosophy was. Yes. And so how do we make decisions? So Parasara Muni said if you can get 6 brahmanas to agree, which may be a statement on trying to get 6 brahmanas to agree on anything. If you can get them to agree on anything, it must be really, really obvious. But it's also, it's a very, very deep point. How do you make what adjustments are legitimate and what aren't? And I would like to say that we have to adjust things in time, but unless we have a firm basis in reading Srila Prabhupada's books and understand who Prabhupada was and listen to his tapes, that shows how old I am, his recordings, the recordings of his lectures, we won't really understand him, and how because sometimes he'll say one thing and sometimes he'll say another, and sometimes he'll say something with such force, and sometimes he'll even say something different with such force. So what we really have to do is flood our consciousness with Prabhupada, and then we can understand in one mood, and because the philosophical points are very context relevant, which means that in one context Prabhupada will say this with complete conviction. In another context he may say the exact opposite with the same strength. So it can become very, very confusing. It's like if you ask a doctor how do you solve this problem, and he's only read one book, it's not going to work because his knowledge will be coming from a very thin and lean source. So a true wise person, wise physician will have read everything and contemplated everything, and his answers to questions, and this is what the Brahminical order was supposed to do. They were the counselors, they were the doctors, they were everything for the people, because they had read deeply the entirety of the Shastras, and they were answering not from one bit here and one bit there or one bit there, but from having assimilated the entirety of the corpus of Shastra. So similarly, if we want, especially in terms that I'm speaking of now, of making adjustments, and again, adjustments have to be made, but the basis, the ideal, has to be seen first and assimilated by reading Srila Prabhupada's books and hearing his lectures and commenting on that. Otherwise, and this has to go on generation after generation after generation. Otherwise, the adjustments that we make will be forced to make by time, could end up losing the whole essence of everything. Lose the essence of everything. So we would like to encourage everyone to read. I know I'm in the right company for making this statement, but read and hear too. Read and hear, because sometimes when you're reading something, you don't get the full the impact. But when you hear the voice, see, confirmed. You hear the voice, and here's one that I heard just this morning, and this is the one that this is an interesting one for me, because it always really bothered me the way that lots of things bother me, but how sometimes the way the devotees dance in the temple, and there's this one type of dance that the devotees do that really upsets me, is that when they hold hands like this, and in front of the deities, and then they stare into each other's faces and have this wild look in their eyes, and then they start spinning around. And the worst part is they bump into people. I saw them in one time in the Krishna Balaram temple in front of the deities, knock over this one old lady, and she didn't even notice practically because she's a Brijbasi, and anyway, these things happen. But it's like a danger to life. So I never really appreciated that. And then this morning, for the first time, I heard Prabhupada say, Rupanuga says, this is in Washington, D.C., 1976, I also wanted to ask a question, Srila Prabhupada, on dancing in the temple room during Arti, especially Mangal Arti. Is it not that devotees should not turn their back while dancing to the deity? And Prabhupada said, no. So you don't know which way he's coming when he says no, actually. Rupanuga then says, and that they should not bump each other or dance with each other personally, distracting the attention from the deity? Shouldn't all the dancing be focused towards the deity? Prabhupada, sometimes dancing is done here in a peculiar method. And then he laughs and everyone laughs. That is not desirable. The dancing, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is showing. Rupanuga, you have shown us the feet, changing of the feet with arms raised, not with the back to the deity. Prabhupada, they do it out of sentiment, but that is not very good. Rupanuga, and they bump one another with the drum or with each other's bodies. This is probably something that's gone out of style in this by this point. They dance and they bump like this. That is not bona fide, is it? It is very popular in our movement now. Prabhupada, they are inventing. What can I do if you invent your own way? So I'm not saying this to criticize the dancing. I'm just saying, I'm saying it to point that things are going to change. They have to change. But let us have a firm grounding, because it is, after all, Prabhupada's movement and how he wanted the movement to be. And then we adjust as required based on what would be pleasing to Prabhupada and based on this knowledge. One final point, that it has been said, or Prabhupada actually said, that I have built the framework, now it is up to you to fill it in. So I see some devotees are really, really good at the framework, and then some devotees take a little corner and fill it in and get into some beautiful detail in making the house of Prabhupada very wonderful and very finely finished. And there's so much individuality, there's so much room for different individual devotees to find something that inspires them, and in a way that I cannot even imitate, where His Holiness Keshavardi Maharaj was expressing his giving of the heart to Prabhupada, which he gave so long ago. So just give yourself to something in service, but give your heart, not mechanically. It's in relationship to Krishna, it's relationship to Mahaprabhu, it's in relationship to Prabhupada, it's personal. As His Holiness Satyananda Maharaj always reminds me, there's a person, it's all personal, the chanting. It's not mechanical. And just one, just one more. I'll end here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
His Holiness Gunagrahi's son, Goswami Maharaj, please come up. Thank you.
So I feel very selfish being here. I wanted to get all the nectar from my exalted God brothers and all the exalted devotees. At the same time, I knew that if I spoke, I would have a greatly deleterious effect on the atmosphere. So please forgive me. I'm so happy to be here with all the devotees at Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet. And I'm also in the mood of gratitude, like Dhanadhar Swami was expressing. Just reminiscing over all the wonderful years in ISKCON. It was such a great ride. Sometimes bumpy, but just like on a roller coaster, sometimes it's bumpy, but it's fun, exciting, especially if you have the faith that everything will come out all right. And I always did, by Srila Prabhupada's mercy. And it all started out by the association of devotees. Because through that association, everything else came. Remember, I used to go to the temple. It took about 45 minutes to ride my bike across town in Buffalo. Very cold. And I would get to the temple just in time for prasadam at 8 o'clock in the morning. Oatmeal prasadam. The devotees made the most delicious oatmeal prasadam I ever had. We all sat together, pristine atmosphere, no dogs, no crazies, no hippies running around. And it's the most wonderful thing. I would go every day at 8 o'clock. And then one day, I came at 8 o'clock and the schedule had changed. They were reading from this book. I couldn't pronounce the name at first. It was the Srimad Bhagavatam. Rupanuga was there and so many nice devotees were there. And they were reading together and they invited me to join in. And I started hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. And although I must admit I wasn't attracted the first day, the second day I felt, well, I just had to come back at the same time. I couldn't come back an hour later when they were serving out the oatmeal prasadam, because then I would be revealed for the reason why I was really coming. So then I started coming at 8 o'clock and I forced myself to listen to the Srimad Bhagavatam so that I could have the oatmeal prasadam later. And gradually I became so attracted to the Srimad Bhagavatam. The way they were reading it, explaining it, questioning, and then every once in a while they'd play a tape of Srila Prabhupada. And it was so wonderful to hear this man speak. The Srimad Bhagavatam was difficult to understand what he said at first. But after a while I was able to understand. And this way the Sangha, the devotees, hearing the Bhagavatam in the association of devotees, sometimes even in the association of Srila Prabhupada, really attracted me so much. The pristine atmosphere. I had never heard anything on this level before. And so the association, the hearing of the Bhagavatam in the association, there was nothing like it I had ever experienced. Finally I wound up crawling into the temple. And I was so happy I did. And there was one verse that I read recently that really struck me. I know I had read it before, but sometimes you pass over these things, these verses, and the next time it really hits you, or the time after that it really hits you. So this is from the Madhya Lila I've been reading. Maharaj, I've been reading. Okay. Out loud also.
I knew that.
Let's see, I think it's 249. Unalloyed love of Krishna is like an ocean of happiness. If someone gets one drop of it, the whole world can drown in that drop. Unalloyed love of Krishna is like an ocean of happiness. If someone gets one drop of it, the whole world can drown in that drop. And I immediately thought of Srila Prabhupada. How Prabhupada had at least one drop. And how he's drowning the whole world in this ocean of happiness by this Krishna consciousness movement. And of course the books are the basis of that. And Prabhupada would always say, I would say 95% of the time, read my books in the association of devotees. Which means, of course, out loud. When you're in the association of each other, you're not reading alone. To yourself, you're reading out loud. And when you read in the association, it's the most magical experience. I remember many years ago when the Bhakti Vriksha program was about to start, Jai Patak Maharaj came to Mayapur, and he was talking about this cell program, this Christian cell program, that was very, very effective for spreading Christianity. And he explained a little bit how it worked. And there were a few of us there. He said, well, first thing they did was read from the Bible. He said, well, let's try to read a little bit from Prabhupada's books. So normally, at least back in those days, it wasn't so common that God brothers would get together and read. They would talk about management. They would talk about spreading Krishna consciousness. They would talk about so many things, but to sit together and say, well, let's just read together, that was a pretty rare thing, at least in those days. And we did that. We started, and we just didn't want to stop. It was so much nectar. And when you realize that, then you just want to do it more and more and more. So when these things happen, that gives me the faith that Krishna consciousness, the Krishna consciousness movement will spread. And I remember when Prabhupada left his body, I was in San Diego. We somehow or other we didn't get the message that Prabhupada wanted everyone to come, so I was in San Diego. And Prabhupada left. I was surprised that he had left so soon. And then I was thinking, well, we just keep following Srila Prabhupada's instructions, then the movement will go on. So I had that faith. It continued. I had actually had that in the beginning when I joined the movement, because the what is the word? The jolt that Srila Prabhupada gave us when we joined the movement. It was like I guess I'd call it a jolt from being in the material world all of a sudden to being in a Hare Krishna movement. It was a completely different experience. And Rupanuga Prabhu would get on the phone. There were 13 temples at that time, and at night he would get on the phone. And he would talk to the various leaders of the different temples, and we would be hearing at least half the conversation. That was enough. And he'd explain the other half. And we couldn't go to bed at night. He had to put us to bed so many times because we were just so excited. So at that time I had the faith, yes, Krishna consciousness all over the world. And then hearing Prabhupada's books, yes, Krishna consciousness all over the world. And then even after Srila Prabhupada left, having these experiences, hearing and chanting with the devotees, and just not just hearing and chanting with the devotees, but also at one point after Srila Prabhupada left, I went up to LA and I somehow got a bootleg copy of Srila Prabhupada's letters. They weren't out yet, and I started reading them, indexing them. And now there is an index in Prabhupada's letters, but they were so fascinating. I'd never read all of them. So Prabhupada's books, Prabhupada's letters, as Bhurijana Prabhu was saying, so much information is there, so much personal information. And then Prabhupada's, as we say, tapes. So they were tapes at one point. Just hearing Srila Prabhupada's voice, his conviction, his compassion, his jokes, the way he imitates the sounds of trucks and different things, all the devotees laughing, his humor, his wit, his compassion, his determination to spread Krishna consciousness, that all comes through. And I've heard recently, I haven't been able to transfer more than 20 tapes onto my phone, so I've been listening to those 20 tapes for months. Same tapes, same recordings. But I'm fine with that, because just hearing Srila Prabhupada's voice is so comforting, and hearing what he's saying over and over and over. So all of these things have given me so much faith that the Krishna consciousness, yes, as this verse is explaining, that drop of mercy that Srila Prabhupada got was enough to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. And my own personal experiences with the holy name, the various festivals that we've had. At one point in time, we were doing a daily festival in Washington, D.C. It turned out to be a huge festival. It started out being a Harinam. We added a couple of instruments, added more amplification, played a beat that the people would be attracted to dancing to, added some t-shirts, we had tons of books, we added some neck beads, some tapes of our kirtans, and we had devotees out in this huge walkway as all the young people came by on field trips from all over North America, from their schools. We'd get them involved in the music and the dancing. Before long, we'd have scores of young people dancing, and then we show them the mantra, and we get them to chant, and before long, they'd be chanting on the microphones. It would be a Hare Krishna festival like this every day, all day long. And then they'd go over to the book table, and they get the books, and we keep track of them. I remember at one festival, Lokanath Swami was there, and at the end of the day, he said, "Thank God for Srila Prabhupada." Because you see the transformation in the people. So from the holy name, the books, and Prabhupada said where there's chanting and there's book distribution, and the book distribution will be very effective, or whether they're just getting books, you see how they light up, and you light up, and you become convinced, yes, Krishna consciousness will spread all over the world. I was listening to a class of Ramaswara the other day. He used to be our GBC many years ago, and he would talk about book distribution for 10 seconds. He'd get everybody running out the door. So I wanted to listen to another one of his classes, and he was explaining how Krishna within their heart inspires them, and Krishna is so pleased that he sees you giving them the book, that his pleasure just shines on you and you become ecstatic. And these are the things that happen, and devotees come back so enlivened. You don't have any doubt, yes, Krishna consciousness will spread all over the world. This movement will spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. And I say that because I see in many situations there are many groups of people that are chanting, Bhakti Fest and other venues where different groups come together and chant. And you could say it's nice, at least musically it's very nice. But when the devotees chant, it's different, because they're connected to Srila Prabhupada through the whole chain of disciplic succession to Lord Chaitanya. And you can see that, you can feel it. They're empowered. And this chanting, you become convinced also by that, and seeing the effects of that. Yes, Prabhupada's movement will indeed spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. So yes, there are so many problems, but maybe I'm a fool. But I have full faith that this movement will spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. And a couple of nights ago, we're having kirtan at at our where we're staying at Giriraj Maharaj's place. We're having kirtan every night. We're getting devotees from all over the world to come, and they're participating. They're very enthusiastic, and sometimes, well, a lot of times, well, they're mostly young devotees, and sometimes we get super first-class kirtaniers, kirtan leaders, and musicians. And the other night there were a couple of brothers. They were wonderful. And when I say first class, I don't just mean they have good voices and they're good musicians. You could see they had a lot of devotion in their hearts, and they inspired everybody. I went up to them afterwards because I had known them since they were little, and now they're in college, but not quite in college, taking online courses. And I said to them, please just don't stop chanting. I said, what are you doing? They said, well, we're not in college, but we're taking courses, but actually all we want to do is serve the holy name. And when they said that, I was just so moved, because the way they said it, they didn't say we just want to chant Hare Krishna or just want to do kirtan. They said, we want to serve the holy name. And so when I heard that, once again, I was further convinced, yes, this movement will continue on past our generation, and it will save the world. Just that one drop of ecstasy, of that ocean of ecstasy that Prabhupada received from the Lord, from Lord Chaitanya, from Lord Nityananda, is enough to save the world. So thank you very much for participating and allowing me to be with you today. And all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
His Holiness Guru Granthi Maharaj Ki Jai.
So I'll speak briefly, and I was very inspired by a few events that happened to me just this week in Vrindavan. So maybe I'll try to share it in the context of appreciating Prabhupada. And then, would anyone like to hear one mystical story? Okay, we'll share one mystical story. It's quite mystical and quite black and white, what happened. So we'll go on. This is not a fit of humility, but a confession. I often see myself as not a devotee, but watching devotees. Because from the very beginning, when I joined, when I met Prabhupada in Mayapur, it was a wonderful experience, which due to some circumstances I'm getting to relive now. And of course I was the only guest, and there were 70 very zealous preachers there. And there was no facility except for a number machine where they take numbers, who gets me next. So my understanding was Prabhupada kept me in his hut all day to protect me. And then after I left Mayapur, I decided it was time for me to go back to America. Prabhupada made the point very clear to me, a very important point. He made it clear to me in my conversation in Mayapur, and he made it clear again. I saw him again briefly in Calcutta, not recorded. And he made this one point, how to advance. And because I wanted to know, and in Mayapur, there were no shortages of ideas on how to advance. I think everyone had one. And you must worship the deities. You must take prashadam. You have to offer obeisances. You have to do this. You have to read the books. You have to chant. You have to chant while reading the books. You have to do this and that. It was quite a stack of them.
And then I got big piles of shoulds. So what to do? So I actually asked Prabhupada, and he said the same thing he said to me in Mayapur. What do I really do? What's the most important thing for me to do? And he said sort of the obvious, good association. And he wrote that to me in a letter too. Really, to get good association. And that has always been my sort of saving grace. Because after that conversation with Prabhupada in Calcutta, said I had bad association in India. As Prabhupada said to me, the problem he won't stay with us is because he wants to smoke marijuana with his friends. That's recorded. They said, that's his problem. And he said it in a very, by the way, when Prabhupada said some heavy things, but he always said it in a very, endearing way. It's nothing we would extract from the written word. But when I listened to the conversation, you can hear Prabhupada said, and I can say there was a twinkle in his eye when he said that. I remember the face. Oh, but he wants to be with his friends who smoke marijuana. Because he would say it in a way that one thing when I was with Prabhupada, I never felt for a moment judged. Now, with all due respect to the young devotees I was with, I can't always say that's how I felt with the devotees outside the Bhajan Kutir. There was some like Yadabar and Vishaka and Giriraj Brahmachari then who I definitely didn't feel judged. There were others who remained nameless and faceless and everything elseless who would make me feel. So I was at Prabhupada, even when it came time to very embarrassing things, like how many regulative principles do you follow? Well, 3, well, 2, well, sort of 1. Like that. And when he was analyzing how many, I never felt I was being judged at all. I was being loved intensely. He was concerned about me. Then I'm going to fast forward a little. Then I decided I got to get better association. So I went to Bombay. And I do what I do best when I was in Bombay. Observe. I grew up kind of with a disability, which was the biggest blessing I could have gotten. So I couldn't play ball or do certain things other kids could do. So I couldn't socialize very much. So I became a keen observer and spent a lot of time alone in the woods. Kind of, I guess I'd call it praying. I was praying. And so it was the biggest blessing of my life, having a disability. It enabled me to have thought about things before I met Prabhupada. At the same time, it kept me very much in my head. So there I am, in Juhu, there's no buildings, there's no ISKCON buildings, there's just the apartment buildings, and on the roof of it, there were some tents we were living in. Some of you might have been there. Very, very austere. And in the morning, I went to Mangal Artik, and I was checking out the Peace Corps. They gave me 3 days to leave the country, that's the deal. And then they poked my liver and said, liver swollen, come back in 2 weeks. That was Krishna's mercy. So I had 2 weeks in Juhu. And when the devotees were dancing around Tulsi, now I'm a scientist, so dancing around a plant, I got to put my arms around that one, And so they're dancing around Tulsi. I didn't know anything about Tulsi then. So I'm sitting watching. This is, and my favorite word was, interesting. And Sarabi, then Brahmachari, comes up to me and he gives me the lecture. The same lecture many of you would have given me. That is, will you please stop licking the outside the jar of honey and taste it? And he said it in such a loving way. Okay. So I went and danced around Tulsi, and to this day I can feel that taste. So, of course, then I went back to thinking again, because it's my comfort zone. But I was chanting, and chanting 16 rounds and things like that. We'll have to debate how much attention, but chanting. So the first point, well, I wanted to jump ahead to my experience this week in Vrindavan. My intention to come here this year to India was to come to Satchidananda Swami and Bhurijana's Prabhu retreat. And I just saw the poster, so now I can double lament, because I really, really wanted to go, because I knew what I needed from my heart. But due to some obligations to attend the GBC meeting, I had a committee I had to serve on with Bir Krishna Maharaj. And so I had to change my plans. So then Krishna gave me a special, okay, you get another chance anyway. And Bhurijana took me under his wing, took me for lunch every day, and taught me really how to pray in front of Krishna Balaram, the way Prabhupada taught you. Sirs, I have a problem. So every day, a different prayer I had for Lord Chaitanya and a different prayer. I didn't even approach Radha Shyama-Sundar. I did approach for Shaka and Lalita. It's different prayers I had. But for Krishna Balaram, I actually approached them as, sirs, I have a problem. They listened. And then Bhurijana taught me how to pray, and then Satchidananda Swami called me up. And then we had a talk that just went to the heart. So even though I was lamenting I couldn't go to the seminar, I had a personal crash course. So what happened to me yesterday, I was at Indradumna Swami's parikram at Sarabha Muni's ashram. Very sweet. And I'm sitting watching all the devotees. This Madhava's giving the kirtan, really good kirtan. And all of a sudden I had the realization, as I'm sitting there, I'm back at circumambulating Tulsi and saying, here I am, that feeling again. I said, maybe I can be one of them. So, what's the lesson here? The lesson we have is what Prabhupada directly taught me is it's by this special association. I mentioned too, there are other very special association. Gunagrahi Maharaj and I had some important intimate talks, some other association. But by this association, lesson from Prabhupada, we will be deeper and more deeply connected with Prabhupada. I have many second-generation devotees came up to me when I was in India this time, more than I've ever had, and said to me, one guy came from Siberia. I am from Siberia. He spoke English. And I said, perfect questions made me a devotee. I think about every hour someone was coming up to me. So it was kind of weird because, it was clearly Prabhupada, not me. I was there, I guess. And the realization I had is that Prabhupada shared this vision of how to associate with people without judging them. How to be, Prabhupada was, excuse the vernacular, a really nice guy. A really nice person. And Prabhupada was, sometimes, Bhurijana and I were discussing the other day, how sometimes we underestimate how divine Prabhupada is, and we also underestimate how human he is. We underestimate, not how you put it, we underestimate these 2 points. And my experience with Prabhupada, extremely divine and extremely human. Very personal. So the second generation devotees are coming up to me and they're saying one another, oh God, your book inspired me, but, and I get the buts a lot, I never met Prabhupada. My answer to that, we have the standard Vani Vapu, and I'll say that because it's all true. But the real deeper answer is that in many ways, through all the books and through the devotees, they're getting, you of the second generation are getting as much of Prabhupada as we had, and in some sense more Prabhupada, because we were all half crazy then. Okay, Dhanadhar Swami's laughing. He thinks half is a gross understatement. And you're getting in one sense, more of Prabhupada than we do. Now, I don't want to speak too long, so I think it's time to switch to a mystical story. Let me pull up my mystical stories here. I have so many stories to tell, but we'll go with a mystical one. Well, do I have time for 2 short ones? Okay. This is probably the most, people say, well, Prabhupada, gave me mercy. It was actually Yamuna who gave me the mercy. It was actually Yamuna. And how was that? Well, what happened was on the Gaur Purnima night, after my second day of talking to Prabhupada, and I speak to him, then go back to serving out prasadam to Bangladesh refugees, and then I'd get a note, Prabhupada needs to see you. I said, I got my place in line. No, Prabhupada needs to see you. Go back in this 3-4 times a day. And then after the second day, it's the moonlight. There's no light there, a little generator that sometimes would work. And the moonlight was reflecting in Yamuna's eyes. And, Yamuna was love, just love. She just radiated love. So the moonlight was reflecting in her eyes. Anybody here heard this story? I don't. Water, please. So the moonlight is reflecting in her eyes, and she walks up to me and says, "You are so fortunate. You are so fortunate." And she kept saying to me, "Prabhupada's giving you all this attention all day. All he says is, 'Where's that boy? Where's that boy?' All day. Says, 'You are so fortunate.'" And she said it with such love that it scared me to death. And I went behind the pandal. And except for now and then, and this week in Vrindavan, I'm not much of a crier. So I went behind the pandal tent and just into the rice fields and collapsed and cried because all of a sudden I said, "Licorice." Oh, licorice. Thank you. Maybe I have bad breath or something. Give me some licorice. I don't know. That's okay. Thank you. So he said, "You're so fortunate. You're so lucky." And she just tears going out of her eyes, glisten. The only light was the moonlight of the Purnima, the Gaura Purnima. So I went behind the rice paddy, and I couldn't be intellectual anymore. My heart was touched. So I just collapsed and cried. And I didn't know what I was crying about. And one of them was, am I going to be one of these? Because I found it always a little odd, a little weird. I couldn't succeed at being a hippie, so I didn't quite fit in. And then, so the next day, Prabhupada calls me in. And I said to Prabhupada, based on what Yamuna said to me, and this is the most important point, based on what Yamuna said to me, I got scared. So I said, tomorrow I have to leave you. And Prabhupada interrupts me. Don't talk L-E-A-V-E, but talk L-I-V-E. He spelt it. Don't talk leave, talk live. I cannot yet, but I was thinking now of returning tomorrow to my town, but he interrupted me again. Don't return. He said it sternly. I should stay here tomorrow? Here? Stay here. You tell me to stay, I'll stay. Then he said the magic words, "You're a very good boy." And when he said that, you know how you have a dog and you go, "Nice Rover, nice Spot." So I felt like I was his dog. And he said, "You're a good boy." I felt like he was petting my head. And so at that moment, I knew he was my eternal master. And it's due to Yamuna's love. So that was the connection I had. Now, I was fortunately, it's a side story for another day, another time, able to share this with Yamuna a few times before she left. So I was very, very grateful for that. So then I promised you a mystical story. So I have to keep my promises to the Vaishnavas. So there is a verse in the Gita. You all know this verse, 930 api chet sudarcharo. You all know this. Even if one commits the most abominable activities, I'll read it exactly so I get it right. Most abominable action. If he is engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. Now, I'm going to roll back to 2 years before I met Prabhupada. I'm at a real nerdy engineering school in upstate New York. And the only thing that interested me was humanities. But, I was a science major, so you do what you do. And I took a course on Oriental philosophies by John Kohler, and he had us read Dr. Radhakrishna's Gita, and I read Edgerton's Gita, Franklin Edgerton's, and both Mayavadi Gitas, but Mayavadi stuff didn't get to me. And when I took the course, we only read it in English. I'd never heard Sanskrit in my life. I knew nothing about Sanskrit, and I don't have a linguistic chip in my brain. Languages don't work very well for me. I'm from New Jersey, so even English is a second language. I asked the professor one day, when we read that verse in English, I said, I don't understand this verse. Of all the verses in the Gita, that's the one that I didn't understand. I said to him, can you explain it to me? You can't, I'm thinking black and white, you can't be a sinner and a saint. It's not possible. I remember I was in engineering school. It's, engineering school, we all think digital, zeros and ones. Humanities, we think, like Bhurijana said, in shades of gray, using the old electronic analogy. We're like an analog computer, for those who know. But my brain was sort of turning digital. Black or white, which is it? And the professor answered me with a very sophisticated way of saying he had no idea whatsoever. And he said, it's intuitively obvious. So that was it. So I forgot about that. And then I go talk to Prabhupada. And the very first verse Prabhupada quotes to me in Sanskrit is a Pi Chet Sudarcharo. And then not only does he quote it, and he says to me, so you know that? That was the only verse I knew. Not in Sanskrit. The first one he quoted to me. And I didn't realize it until I was rereading Perfect Questions recently. It's the last one he quoted to me. So that is quite a mystical story. So how that happened, I can't explain. So now I've taken up too much time. So I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you for helping me be one of you.
I had thought previously, well, what is the thing to talk about? And as I hear now, already, Danadar Maharaj and now Brahmatirtha Prabhu have talked about gratitude. So I guess it's probably something that other devotees have talked about today, but it was what I decided to talk about, so I'll try to say something about that. You can ask yourself, grateful for what? What does it come down to in its essence? What is our gratitude that we should have, or that we can have if we open our hearts to Srila Prabhupada? And I recall having a conversation in recent months with Hari Suri Prabhu, and he said something which struck me very deeply about gratitude. And he said, we have been given the most privileged life in the most elevated association. And that I thought was a very profound thing to say. That we all, regardless of our backgrounds, have been given the most privileged of lives in the most elevated of association. Privilege means literally privé lege. It means private law. There's so many kinds of law that we are aware of. But basically it breaks down to common law and private law. And in ancient times, you see it still today, where people in corporations and organizations of all kinds, they have privileges that you don't get if you're not in that inner core of the organization. And in olden times, the lord of the manor or the king, he practiced privilege. You were able to get certain conditions in your life that you wouldn't get if you weren't close to the king, and that translates into so many situations throughout the whole of the creation. But when we think about it, at the beginning of the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, "Itam te tu guyatamam." And then he says, Rajaguyam. This is the most secret of all secrets. Now, we understand that idea of secrecy exists in so many ways, on so many levels, in so many situations, where there's secret, even like you see in government, there's secret, there's top secret, then there's categories of top secret, then there's above top secret, and then it goes up to, I don't know where, but it creates more and more confidentiality as you go along. And investigators are trying to find out secrets all the time. What's this person's secret? What in criminal situations you're trying to find out what is this person keeping secret? What has to be revealed here? So secrets are everywhere. Confidentiality is everywhere. And in regard to what we have been ushered into, we have been ushered into the most secret of all secrets. No matter what categorization of secrecy you want to put on information and situations, the most secret of all secrets in the totality of all that is, and that even makes no sense because, as we understand, what is infinite. But the most secret of all secrets within all of that is that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and we are all his eternal servants. It's such a simple piece of information when it comes down to it. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We are all his eternal servants. Here is the process by which you can re-establish your lost relationship with Krishna. This is the most privileged of situations to be in. And how have we got here? Simply by the unconditional mercy of Srila Prabhupada. As the representative of Krishna, he comes with unconditional love. That was one thing that struck me very, very strongly when I was able to have some little exchanges with Prabhupada. I could tell by the way he talked to me and the way he looked at me that he really cared about me. And I was a stranger to him. I mean, who was I? And in the scheme of things, indeed, who am I? When one thinks about that in terms of oneself. As life goes on, we see so many more and more complex situations of society develop that we get involved in. And we have a sense of our own insignificance and worthlessness within the material world. But here we see, just like Srila Prabhupada said about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he saved me. He saved me. And we've been picked up from the worst of fates. The situation of entanglement in this material world has been going on since time immemorial, and already it was established that it would go on for an immeasurable time into the future. Then, like the saying goes, then out of the blue, who could have planned for this? Who could have expected this to happen? That suddenly, I mean, I remember we used to have the articles, how I came to Krishna consciousness. But actually, the reverse is the situation. How Krishna came into my life. How Krishna came into my life. And how was he brought into my life? By the most elevated of association. By the most elevated of association. Srila Prabhupada was not a charismatic person. I always balk at that idea of somebody has charisma. Because usually behind that charisma there's some self-motivation. But Srila Prabhupada wasn't like that. Srila Prabhupada isn't like that. I don't even like to talk about Srila Prabhupada in the past tense. Because as the years go by, the personal presence of Srila Prabhupada in one's life, by virtue of this privilege, becomes a more and more personal connection. But Srila Prabhupada didn't come. I was shocked actually when I first saw Srila Prabhupada how small he was. How a little man. And then you'd see pictures of him with Brahmananda and all these big guys around him. And he's just this little man in the center of it all, in material estimation. He was just a little man. And generally speaking, people don't pay attention to little men in the material world. Unless, of course, you have a huge ego, a huge charisma that you can use to control people. But Prabhupada, he was a little man, but he had no charisma. He exuded an aura, so that as soon as one is in the association of Srila Prabhupada, one feels oneself to be in the spiritual realm. No doubt, no doubt. And I picked up on that point where people say, oh, well, you saw Srila Prabhupada. Well, yes, we saw Srila Prabhupada, we heard Srila Prabhupada. I go through the routine very often telling people, well, actually beyond the early days of the movement, as things began to expand, you could probably count maybe 100, 150 devotees who had any kind of extended personal exchange with Srila Prabhupada, or did any personal service to him for any length of time. Most devotees' experience of Srila Prabhupada was, if you were lucky enough for him to come to your temple on a tour of the Western world, or if you were lucky enough to go to the temple where he was going to be, then you'd be there when he arrived, you would see him get out of his car, you'd see him come in, you'd see him greet the deities, then he would give his arrival address, then he would go to his rooms. And then you probably wouldn't see him again until, if by some chance you got the opportunity to go on the morning walk, and as the number of devotees increased, the number of people on the morning walks was actually limited, so not so many people even got to go on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada. And then he would come back to the temple, and he would greet the deities, he would accept Guru Puja, then he would give Bhagavatam class, then he would go back to his rooms. And maybe you'd be able to go to a darshan in the evening. But what was the connection, the real connection all through all of that, for all of us, was that we heard him speak. think how that's another reason for gratitude. In this, we're born in the 20th century. We lived through, so much. Like we said, we're talking about tapes, but now it's all digitalized, and who knows where it's going to go next. But you go back 150 years, Srila Prabhupada traveling and preaching, it would only be what somebody could write down and remember. But we've got thousands of hours of Srila Prabhupada speaking. And that transcendental sound is also part of our privilege. To be able to just at any time, just flick a switch, hear the introduction, the following is a class on the Srimad Bhagavatam, and all the details, and then, so, Prabhupada's, that's so, and you're there. You're there with Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada is there with you. And by His grace, He has created this wonderful society where the most elevated of association is available to us all over the world. So for me, this simple point that Harisori made, I took it to be a very profound thing. That we have been given the most privileged of lives in the most elevated of association. And as Srila Prabhupada once said to Tribhuvanath had arranged for Prabhupada to come to Edinburgh, where there was a small preaching centre, and they'd done some programs and not many people had come, and it was a little bit disappointing, but Prabhupada was not disturbed by any of that. And Prabhupada said one morning he went in to Srila Prabhupada's room. Srila Prabhupada was chanting japa. And he watched him come in, and he just kept chanting while Tribhuvannath offered his obeisances and came and sat before him. And he chanted for another minute or two, and then he stopped and he looked at Tribhuvannath and he said, "This Krishna consciousness is so simple, you can miss it. It's so simple, you can miss it." And we come from a very complex world, which makes us look for all kinds of layers of meaning and motivation and so forth. But Prabhupada came with a simple message and a simple gift and made it available to anybody who wanted it. No matter where you came from, no matter what your background was, he made no distinction. His love is the reflection of the love of the Supreme Lord. It is unconditional. Unconditional. And I think that is the thing that is the most confidential thing about this privileged situation, is that the love that we have been drawn into and the love that we can taste is unconditional. Thank you very much. All glory to the Prabhupada.
Just that we've been here at Govardhan for a couple of weeks now, and we've been reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, as somebody mentioned, for 5 hours a day. And we're not tired. We're happy. Everyone's happy. There's about 20 to 25 devotees crammed into a tiny little room, and we're just hearing. And we heard a lot. One thing we heard was that the ear holes are very small, but inside is as big as the sky. So Prabhupada, as the devotees were thinking to themselves, how is it that we'll go on hearing? There's so many things to hear. Just the third canto. We read the whole third canto, and now we're halfway through the fourth. But it seems like so many things coming in, and then Prabhupada encouraged us. He said that the inside is as big as the sky. It can accommodate unlimited hearing. You can go on hearing. And in my reading in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, I read something that stuck in my mind. Because the Prabhupada said that the profession of every conditioned soul is rascaldom. As we heard so many times about how people are rascals. And Bhagavad-ashraya Prabhu in the readings, he brought up this point about how Prabhupada has mentioned how people for various reasons are rascals. So I looked up the word, and there's rascal, there's rascaldom, there's rascality, and there's rascalism. There's a lot of different ways, nouns, adjectives for rascal, but it means to be unprincipled. And as we're reading Srila Prabhupada's books in the Association of Devotees, it's palpable. I can feel myself becoming principled. I notice it, especially in the rarefied atmosphere of Govardhan, where practically one can watch one's subtle body like a screen, especially on parikram. You can see you're walking along and just see on the screen. I can see on the screen in my mind, and I can watch every year. This is the 18th year we've done this, coming here to Govardhan. And I can watch every year the same over on the screen and see the anartas and notice, what do you look like now? And practically equate these anartas that are there with rascaldom. And when Prabhupada uses that word, rascal, or this is the profession, this is your profession. What is your profession? Rascaldom. It's what I do. I'm just a rascal. But by hearing these pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotees and Prabhupada's purports, I come to the realization that Prabhupada is perfectly principled. His principles are completely aligned with the will of Lord Krishna. And by hearing them, then I naturally, somehow it's like a process of osmosis, the hearing process. The sound vibration goes in, and this is what we're promised in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Shridyantaksto Hibhadrani Vidunoti Suritsatam. Krishna helps. And how does he help? One has to submit oneself to the hearing process, but then he helps to assemble everything and also dissemble the anartas magically by giving attention to this. And another thing I heard that struck me about Prabhupada was that when filling out an immigration form, it asked for a distinguishing mark. I think sometimes they ask for that. So Prabhupada put Vaishnav Tilak as a distinguishing mark. And I couldn't get that out of my mind. How? Because most people, they'll put a scar, it's like I'm scarred for life, that's my distinguishing mark, or I have a tattoo, or my head is deformed, my mother dropped me on my head when I was a kid. Whatever it is, some distinguishing mark, something that happened to me that distinguished my prarabdha, that body that I have, from others. But Prabhupada's distinguishing mark is the tilak. And I was just trying to think about it philosophically, and how the way in which his distinguishing mark is by his choice to serve Lord Krishna. He puts the tilak on, so that's what distinguishes. And everybody else's distinguishing marks come because they're being beaten by Maya, because of being engaged in the profession of rascaldom in the material world. So it's completely edifying to hear from Prabhupada's books, to realize how distinctive they are, how distinctive he is in presenting the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, and then also to then give them to other people. Recently, there's been a huge surge in the distribution of the sets of Srimad Bhagavatams. It's just an idea whose time has come. And it's an edifying feeling to go to people's homes and then bring in what we know has so much power from reading the books, and to leave them behind in somebody's house. We were recently in Naperville, which is in Illinois, and we had a real estate agent who could pick out all the different places that we might want to go. So we strategically went into neighborhoods and knocked on particular doors, and it worked very well. I think we sold about 12 Srimad Bhagavatam sets in one afternoon. And in one of the places that we went in, the woman who answered the door was Indian, the family was Indian, and she told us right away that I already have my own guru. I know who you guys are, but you come in, but we don't need anything. We're fine. And we were eyeing her husband, and she said, he's an atheist, And so we were with a group of devotees, and some of them went on talking to her in Hindi. I couldn't understand what they were saying. And already they sort of jumped ahead, and they were offering all kinds of ideas to her about why she should take the book. Not something I would have done, not the way I would have done it. So I sort of detached myself from the situation. I just went and talked to the husband. And I talked to him for a few minutes, and I told him about Prabhupada and how he had, these are special books. He had brought them from India. Just one box of books he brought with him on a ship, on a freighter. And how they had changed people's lives all over the world. And he was just listening to me, and meanwhile there was a commotion going on the other side of the living room with devotees trying to convince this woman who was unconvincible. And suddenly the man said, okay, I'll take it. And his wife overheard it, and she said, what? We'll take it? And he said, yeah, we'll take it. And my heart was so touched that he just, because we were there and because we were telling him about Prabhupada and the importance of the books, and because we had some feeling for it, that he just decided to take it, even though she said he was an atheist. And then we ended up hauling in this gigantic box of Bhagavatams into their home and taking them out and setting them up. And when we walked out, I felt that this is the perfect combination. The hearing Srila Prabhupada's books, and then going out and meeting people and just recommending that they take these books into their homes, and that will definitely do some damage when somebody takes a full set of Bhagavatams in their house. And it'll do some major damage all over the world, the mass distribution of Srimad Bhagavatam in every village, every home, every business. When Giriraj Maharaj, it was Devamrita Swami heard about this surge in the distribution of sets. He wrote into the GBC conference about how he says this is fulfilling Prabhupada's innermost desire. He wanted that his full sets of books go out to people all over the world. He said, I want every civilized, every person, gentleman, to have a full set of my books in their home. So just today I'm glorifying Prabhupada's distinctiveness, his distinguished nature. And what distinguishes him? The distinguishing mark is tilak, which it seems so insignificant walking into a country and they just check off his form. What's the distinguishing mark? Tilak. No one noticed. But when he came in, he wreaked havoc on the profession of the material world, which is full-on rascaldom. And he destroyed it while he was here, and he goes on destroying it for those who listen carefully to what he wrote and what he spoke. And then we can actually cover the world with Prabhupada's full sets of Srimad Bhagavatams. This will destroy rascaldom once and for all. Hare Krishna. Gaur Premanand. And now we're going to have a Pushpanjali ceremony.